Welcome to another Build Day Live video from NetApp here in Boulder, Colorado. I'm Esker Cook and I'm joined by Rob Esker. Rob, can you tell us what it is you do at NetApp?
So I'm responsible for cloud services on our on-premises full stack product, NetApp HCI. So it's bringing cloud services to that product, but it's of course also in turn making an on-premises capability accessible to our otherwise public cloud hosted capabilities.
And particularly we're talking about the relatively recently announced NetApp Kubernetes service. And it seems Kubernetes is the flavor of extending IT infrastructure towards being more cloud-like. Can you talk us a little bit about what the capabilities are of the NetApp Kubernetes service that was announced?
Sure. So NetApp Kubernetes service amounts to a universal control plane. We're able to manage deployment, lifecycle tasks. We also add some application lifecycle capabilities as well in an open way across all of the recognizable public clouds and your own premises and all the variations of on-premise. And so when I say open, what I'm referring to is we're using unmodified upstream Kubernetes. So we're seizing upon not just the portability advantages of containers and container image format, but the ubiquity of Kubernetes, so that you could actually deploy something on NKS but move it elsewhere. Likewise, the inverse is true. We're not trying to lock you in. We're just trying to provide a better capability and something that's foundational to some of the additional services we're going to be delivering down the road.
So some of the unique value here is the ability to get Kubernetes essentially as a service rather than having to go through the science project reputation that Kubernetes has for on-premises deployment.
Absolutely. So NKS, it's literally 3 clicks to a new Kubernetes cluster, unless you want to turn a few knobs. You need not necessarily. But with NKS on NetApp HCI, we further provided deployment automation. So we are able to prepare a system and get it to a state of ready for NKS, so that it's a deployable region without you having to do all of this manual assembly.
Right, and then I can deploy a new Kubernetes cluster for each of my developers if that's my deployment model.
You could.
And then for production as well. And so it is absolutely native, normal Kubernetes that I can just bring the manifest that I've been running elsewhere and start deploying straight on top of this platform.
Take your upstream Helm charts, take your homegrown containerized applications built of Kubernetes and run it unmodified. Absolutely.
And that's part of the value proposition, is to be using that same methodology to deploy for different public clouds. We've got the same service available on public clouds as well as on premises.
So all of the recognizable public clouds, at least North American-centric public clouds, the Azure, Google, Amazon, of course, are deployable capabilities. So not just like the GKEs, but also Google Cloud Platform itself. So you have options there even within the public clouds.
And then, of course, it's not long been VMworld in San Francisco, and VMware with Project Pacific were talking about transforming your vSphere environments, no matter where they are, into a Kubernetes environment. How does that look different to what we have with the NetApp's Kubernetes service?
Yeah, so Project Pacific, and then and I guess as I understand it, certainly I'm not at VMware, its sort of companion Tanzu mission control capability is interesting, and we look forward to working with VMware in the upstream Kubernetes community. We both inhabit. There's a project called the Cluster API Special Interest Group, and we're both active participants there. And so I think we're both trying to deliver similar capabilities. But I think the things that get really interesting in terms of how NKS differs is the role and the dynamic that it creates vis-a-vis some of our data fabric concepts. The ability to not just deploy applications in any place, but to do so in a way, again, that's fundamentally open, but with your data set. So with our data fabric concepts, with our cloud volumes capabilities, we'll be able to actually place your Kubernetes-based applications on any of these recognizable public clouds on premises, but we'll also be able to arrange for your data set to be in the same place by efficient, performant, secure means.
So you're addressing one of the big differences in how enterprises use Kubernetes versus cloud native. So cloud native is normally these stateless containers that have no persistent storage, but almost universally we see enterprise customers wanting persistent storage, and this is where that NetApp Cloud Volumes comes into play. Is this something where maybe in the future there's portability of that persistent data and therefore of my application between different places where it's executing?
That strikes exactly what I was alluding to, is that with Cloud Volumes, a companion to NKS, which we'll now be making available on NetApp HCI as well, in relationship to Cloud Volumes Service powered by ONTAP at all of the public clouds, we're going to deliver a capability called the Data Fabric Orchestrator that allows you to manage all of those locales and make them deployable, make them rather something you can provision a new cloud volume at through a common control plane. So you can kind of think of NKS and the Fabric Orchestrator as companions in a lot of ways. And over time, maybe heading in more or less the same direction to where you could facilitate placement initially at deployment time, maybe movement or migration scenarios of your containerized applications via NKS or all these locales, but in a way that coordinates their availability to their persistent data. Indeed, maybe actually moves, migrates, replicates, caches as appropriate to each of those different locales.
And we know that you have NetApp ONTAP appliances in a number of public cloud providers. You were talking about virtualized NetApp on top of the HCI, but we don't actually see it as NetApp, do we? If we're using Cloud Volumes on top of HCI, what do we actually see?
Yeah, you get an experience of a cloud service. You get a consumption or as a service capability. So, fundamentally, I want an NFS export of X capacity of Y performance, or SIFS share of similar sort of dimensions. But I don't necessarily want to deploy or operate, manage, if you will, the impressive set of capabilities on tap, but that's maybe not necessarily what I sought out to do. I just, give me the share, give me the export. So, sorry.
We move more towards the developer consuming this than an operations person having to provision it.
That's right.
It's more programmatic provisioning of resource.
But it is, it could be programmatic or it could be driven through a GUI, but either way, the reality of that ONTAP backend still providing you the capacity and the performance and any of the other attributes you expect of ONTAP, but you're not exposed to necessarily the complexity of having to arrange for that. You just get that service experience. That's true of Cloud Volumes on HCI as well. And indeed, ONTAP in a virtualized form is present to actually deliver those capabilities. But you as a consumer, and for that matter, you as a deployer, need not confront that because we automate that for you.
All right. I think that's a really smart way to shift how your infrastructure is consumed and used, and particularly move it away from remedy tickets and manual processes towards consumption, integration into CI/CD pipelines for deployment, and more directly into the applications, a much more cloud-like experience. And we were talking previously to Adam Carter about the futures of how all of this becomes much more cloud-like over time, which I think is very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to. I'll have to watch your broadcast of Adam's talk.
Indeed. Well, Thank you very much for joining me, Rob. And thank you for joining us here at Build Day Live with NetApp. And stay tuned for further videos from Boulder, Colorado.